everyone, it's Katrina. Think the desert is just hot and boring? Think again. Get ready for a fright fest as we explore the creepiest things ever found in the scorching sands. Buckle up, history buffs and conspiracy theorists alike, because today we are diving into some scary discoveries. So if you're a little squeamish, beware. Bound and buried in the desert. 800 years ago, somebody was bound up tightly like a Christmas ham until their body was scrunched up into a ball. Then this person, their ropes of bondage making them look like they were caught in a net, was buried underground. Now, archaeologists have found this tormented prisoner's final resting place. Make no mistake, this is creepy. I've seen a lot of mummies at this point, but the bound victim discovered at the Cajamarquilla archaeological site of Peru is one of the most shocking. The mummy was buried about 15 miles from the capital of Lima, found in the desert at the foothills of the Andes by local archaeologists at the State University of San Marcos. The bizarre mummy belonged to the Chakya culture. I know you've heard of the Inca, and you've even heard of the Nazca or the Chimu, but very few people have ever heard of the Chakya. It's surprising because the Chakya dominated the Andes Mountains near Lima for a staggering 400 years. In comparison, the Inca only ruled Peru from 1438 to 1533, barely a century. Long before the Inca came to power, the tribes, indigenous cultures, and kingdoms of the Andes practiced mummification. They started mummifying people in the Andes region 7,000 years ago. Long before the Egyptians were even Egyptians. They did things a little differently in Peru, though. They didn't mummify dead people and stuff them into tombs to be forgotten. They would take them home with them. Let's say somebody's best friend died. They would bring their friend home as a mummy, even taking them to public ceremonies like marriages. Imagine having your dead, mummified best friend front and center on your wedding day. When mummies were buried, their tombs typically stayed open. People could stop by and have a drink with the dead. They could bring food to their loved one's mummified body. To these ancient cultures, all this interaction with the dead was normal. They also had different ways of mummifying people. Some people were left high up in the mountains to freeze and mummify naturally. Others were buried in the sand of the desert. Some had their insides emptied and were preserved using alcohol, specifically chicha, a type of maize beer. Then there is our victim, wrapped up like the guest of a sadist torture dungeon. He or she died about 800 years ago and was forced into the fetal position by being tied up with cords. The person was buried with some nice offerings like ceramics and stone tools. They likely had some significance in society. Not everybody could be buried in this manner. This was often reserved for people who could afford such a luxury in death. Maybe they were sacrificed, but it's unclear. Nobody really knows much about this person other than that they were bound and buried in a most brutal fashion. Does this seem like a burial you'd like to have? Baby alien skeleton. While exploring a series of caves in Mexico's state of Monterrey, Edu Survivencia discovers something you're not going to believe. It's something you might even recognize. The thing Edu found isn't human. It appears to be a baby alien skeleton, just like the Atacama skeleton from Chile. This is a weird story that just came up, so it's not 100% verified. Scientists haven't looked into it, and some are already saying it's a hoax. Nevertheless, here is what Edu shared of his discovery on social media. He left his home and traveled to a protected natural area known as the Cerro de las Mitras, famously home to a network of creepy, dark caves. As he explored the caverns, it was dirty and spooky. Edu was poking around when he came across the remains of a tiny creature. The creature either looks like an alien or a goblin corpse. I can't say which. It's very small, so small that it easily fits in the palm of your hand. Some online viewers said it could be a mummified human fetus from centuries ago. Others have said it looks like a tiny bird. But what is it really? To many people, Edu's discovery is reminiscent of the tiny alien body found in Chile's Atacama Desert in 2003. The tiny corpse was found by Oscar Munoz in an abandoned church. It was such a curiosity that Oscar was able to sell it for a high price to a Spanish businessman. That businessman, Ramon Navia Osorio Villar, was convinced the skeleton was from a tiny race of ancient people. He believed they were like fairies, living alongside the Aymara culture in South America thousands of years before today. Ramon said there were small people living in caves who only ever came out at night. They had almond-shaped eyes, just like the Atacama skeleton. Take a look at this picture. It is the Atacama skeleton found in Chile. Now take a look at this picture. It's the alien baby skeleton found by Edu in Mexico. They look similar, right? There's one more thing I need to tell you about. It's critical if we're going to break the case. In 2018, DNA analysis was performed on the Atacama skeleton. The analysis showed that the creature is human. It appears to be a premature human fetus that suffered from a combination of very rare mutations. Mutations associated with things like dwarfism and scoliosis. Thanks to the DNA analysis, most experts say the skeleton definitely wasn't an alien. But now there is a second specimen, thanks to Edu, which really shakes things up. A little more bondage. Nobody knows if the bound Chakya mummy was a sacrifice. However, I can tell you for certain that these Stone Age women were. In a dusty plain in France, researchers identified a group of sacrifice victims who were brutally killed and buried. The method of execution here was so horrific, it took me a while to decide whether I'd even share it with you. But here we are, and here I go. Let's start with the tomb itself, discovered in the south of France. It's not exactly a desert like in Peru, but it is still a dry, arid zone. Inside the tomb were a pair of women safely buried for the last 5,500 years. It isn't the nicest tomb. In fact, calling it a tomb is a little bit of a stretch. Researchers think it looks more like a pit that could have been used to store grain. I don't want to get too graphic here, but the gist is that each victim had their neck tied to their legs, which led to strangulation. This was how they died, lying at the bottom of the sandy dirt pit. They may have even been buried alive while suffocating. There's always some death when talking about archaeology, but this is violence to the extreme. It's also not the only time that archaeologists have found women who were killed like this across Neolithic Europe. I hope you know what you were signing up for with today's extra creepy video. New research has identified more than a dozen almost identical murders or sacrifices, whatever you want to call it. Through their exhaustive research, a team of scientists looked at 14 sites from Eastern Europe to Catalonia. They also looked at rock art found in Sicily, where these murders or sacrifices were etched onto the stone. Their research points to this form of killing already being ritualized 6,000 years ago. The study authors wrote that ritualized violence was a major part of Neolithic customs. They think it was motivated by agricultural necessity. The women in the pit and others like them were tied up and sacrificed in an attempt to increase crop yields. Like in many cultures, it was a sacrifice to the gods to have a better harvest. And now for number 10, but first it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Crystal Matrix and Mildred LaWare for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about creepy discoveries. Strange symbols in New Mexico. An alien crash site has been discovered in the desert near Roswell, New Mexico, and it was all thanks to Google Earth. Conspiracy theorists are saying this is where the aliens touched down. Are they right? 70 miles from the city of Roswell, in the same vicinity that the legendary UFO crashed in July of 1947, satellite images revealed bizarre occult symbols etched into the earth. One of the symbols appears to be an inverted swastika. Check out these snapshots from YouTube UFOvni. The satellite images clearly show what looks like a ring of concentric circles marked at the center by a humongous swastika. Is it a sign of the Buddha or a remnant of Nazi Germany? Perhaps the better question is, why is the symbol here at all? Even if it isn't evidence of an alien landing site, what is it doing in New Mexico? Some have said it's a sign of alien worship, somehow connected to the Nazi belief in aliens. As you might already know, the Nazis were obsessed with all things extraterrestrial and occult. There are rumors that they started secret bases around the world, including in Antarctica. The Nazis were always looking for the mystical and the otherworldly. Perhaps their obsession made it to America. Other people have dismissed the discovery as nothing nefarious. These naysayers claim the patterns were likely made by the U.S. Air Force for target practice. In 2007, the U.S. Navy apologized when satellite images exposed the shape of the Coronado Naval Amphibious Base in San Diego. It had been designed in the exact shape of a swastika, but it was only recognizable from the air. Whoever designed the base clearly didn't look ahead to the future of satellites revealing everyone's shady secrets. Some of the markings found near Roswell also look suspiciously like Nordic runes, only they aren't Nordic. Look at this photo, also from YouTube, UFO of me. The impression in the desert looks almost like somebody stamped an alien language into the sand. The monsters of Shiprock. If you've ever seen the Shiprock monument with your own two eyes in Navajo country, it may have filled you with a sense of wonder and power. You may not have even known why. I'm here to give you the scoop on why this craggy rock peak was such a sacred site to the Navajo people. Shiprock is a natural castle of stone rising from the New Mexican desert 7,000 feet above sea level. It's the only thing you can see for miles around, looking like a ruin from another time and another civilization. I want you to look at this image, courtesy of John Lupu. It looks like an AI image, don't you think? But this picture is real. It shows Shiprock for the towering monster it is, and the huge tear in the earth leading to it. What makes this place unique is that it was born when a giant volcano erupted. What you just saw is the only remnant of that ancient eruption, birthed from a meeting between lava and water. A meeting so volatile, it formed a mountain. When early pioneers arrived in the West, they named the monument Shiprock because it reminded them of a boat. Local legends date back long before the Pilgrims. The Navajo told chilling stories about Shiprock. They believed a pair of gigantic monster birds lived at the top of the rocky castle. The birds flew out every day to snatch the Navajo from the desert and fly them back to their nest. The birds were such a problem that everybody knew somebody who had been eaten by them. At the top of Shiprock, the jagged spires of rock are like long spears. It was said the birds would drop their victims, impaling them. As the victims groaned and flailed their limbs, the birds would start to eat them alive. This isn't the only legend, but it is the most gruesome. The Navajo also believed that a giant bird carried their ancestors to New Mexico thousands of years ago. The bird dropped them off at the top of Shiprock. Those original Navajo lived upon the rock, descending only to tend to their crops, until one day lightning struck, destroying their only way to the top. The people who had been up there when the lightning hit were left to starve to death. From then on, the elders forbade anyone from ever climbing up Shiprock again. When the Europeans arrived, it was still forbidden in Navajo custom for anyone to climb to the top of Shiprock. The Navajo elders feared that if someone went up there, the ghosts of those who starved to death would be disturbed and enraged. But native tradition didn't stop the white people. By the 1930s, rock climbing had become extremely popular. Climbers came from all across the world to scale the sides of the Navajo's sacred monument. This continued until the 1960s, when a tragic accident occurred. The accident helped the Navajo ban any additional climbing. To this day, it's forbidden to go to the top of Shiprock. No one may disturb the spirits of the ancients. Masks of horror. Archaeologists have found some of the oldest masks ever worn during ancient rituals. These old pieces of headgear are not just creepy, they are downright unnerving. They were found in the Judean hills of Israel at the site of Horvat Duma. Perhaps you've heard of it? When I say old, I mean very old. The collection of masks comes from 9,000 years ago. They were recently put on display and labeled as the oldest masks in the world. Each mask is unsettling to look at. Just try winning a staring contest with one of these things. No two of them are the same, but each one invokes a feeling of pure dread. They have narrow eye holes, pointed noses, and teeth to make you feel like you've just stepped into a Tim Burton movie. The masks also have holes along their edges, which was likely used to strap them to people's faces. The bizarre masks were worn during ceremonies that took place in the Stone Age. They were worn thousands of years before civilization supposedly started. Scientists keep saying civilization began with the rise of places like Egypt and Mesopotamia, but clearly some weird stuff was going on way earlier in Israel. Scientists at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem did a comparative study of the masks. It turns out they were surprisingly comfortable to wear. The eye holes gave a wide field of vision, so they were practical. They were even made to softly hug human facial contours. That's surprisingly advanced tech for people who were around before the first pyramid was built. One thing I should have mentioned is that the masks weren't all found at one site. They were gathered from a variety of places scattered throughout the desert. Some of the masks were even discovered in a cliffside cave near the Dead Sea. Who were these people who left their creepy masks scattered in such desolate areas? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The tarim mummies and their awesome genes. 3,200 years ago in the Chinese desert, people were sporting pants that were sort of like jeans. Welcome to an episode of Ancient Fashion. Just kidding. Things will definitely be getting creepy here soon, so don't worry. The Chinese desert I'm talking about is called the Tarim Basin. It's one of the most mysterious and driest places in the world, once home to an ancient civilization. In the 1970s, Chinese archaeologists stumbled upon more than 500 mummies buried in a vast graveyard. The mummies come from the first known settlers of the region, and while they were all grotesque and disturbing in their own unique way, as mummies tend to be, one body intrigued researchers more than the others. He was preserved enough that he could star in an episode of The Crypt Keeper. He was also dressed in some rather sharp threads. He wore fashionable leather boots, a headband decorated with seashells and discs of bronze. He also had a poncho and some spectacular trousers. Compared to the Egyptian mummies of pharaohs, this guy was dressed to impress. Scientists named him the Turfan Man. His trousers were particularly impressive because the design was just as intricate as modern denim jeans. The pants were also just as durable as the most durable pair of jeans in your closet right now. This was an awesome discovery because it showed some serious ingenuity on behalf of the desert dwellers. Just compare the Turfan Man's trousers to the kinds of clothes other ancient people were wearing. In other parts of the ancient world, people wore gowns. The Romans were sporting tunics and the Greeks pranced around in togas. Prance might be a strong word. I'm not totally sure if the Greeks pranced. The point being that ancient people loved their loose-fitting, flowing robes, but not in China, where they wore surprisingly modern-looking clothing. And by the way, this is where the Turfan Man and his people lived. The image is an aerial shot of the Tarim Basin taken by NASA. It doesn't exactly look like a hotbed of activity, does it? It doesn't look like the kind of place you would expect to find the world's first gene manufacturing facility. You can tell why the Tarim Basin is considered so mysterious. Nothing but sand and death. Yet the Tarim culture thrived here. Scientists are still struggling to figure out how they did it. The spider of the desert. Archaeologists in Egypt found a shattered rock panel in the Kharga oasis, located deep in the western desert. The panel was used as an easel for some ancient person to draw the massive image of a creepy spider. Researchers haven't properly dated the piece of artwork, but think it's about 6,000 years old. It's definitely prehistoric, definitely before Egypt was unified. The lead investigator on the case is Salima Ikram from the American University in Cairo. According to Salima, there are several spiders on the main panel. They seem to be climbing through some sort of web with little blobs that might be insects that are trapped in the web. The poor insects look like they're waiting to be eaten by the spiders. It's a spider feast. This discovery is so unique that the scientific world is going nuts over it. There is nowhere else where prehistoric people drew spiders. It's just not a thing they did. Buffalo? Totally. Weird alien-like humanoids? Definitely. Extinct beasts? You got it. But not spiders. Historians don't know why spiders were ignored by ancient artists. Maybe ancient people were scared of spiders, so they didn't draw them, or maybe they didn't like them. Either way, nobody wanted to draw spiders, except, apparently, people in this random chunk of the Egyptian desert. The secret to their interest in arachnids could have to do with the desert itself. People who lived in this harsh environment 6,000 years ago had a tough existence. The sun was a constant enemy that they learned to avoid at all costs. While they avoided the sun, there were spiders basking in it. Some spiders in the western desert can be found lounging in their orb webs directly under the scorching hot sun at high noon. These spiders' impunity to the sun likely captivated ancient people. A cult may have grown from this, with the spider becoming some sort of symbol for eternal life. Maybe this is a case of spider turned desert deity. What do you think? America's scariest motel. This is beyond any doubt the creepiest place that I've ever seen in a desert. It's not ancient and it's not a ruin, but it is frightening enough that I must warn you to stay away. It's called Clown Motel, a twisted rest stop on the road between Las Vegas and Reno. It currently holds the title as the scariest motel in America. What makes it so scary, you're probably wondering? Clowns, and also clowns. More clowns than you know what to do with. Rooms with more than 2,000 clown figurines adorning the shelves and furniture. Clowns watching you as you're trying to sleep. As if that weren't enough, guests have reported hearing laughter trickling through the corridors like the circus is in town. Guests have claimed that they woke up in the night to see a fully formed clown phantom hovering in their room. One of the housekeepers, Andrea Selig, said each time she enters the motel, she is overwhelmed with horrible anxiety. She always feels as if there is somebody with her. If I told you Clown Motel was built on a Native American burial ground, would that make you stay away? Because it might have been, and I'm not just saying that. In the early 1900s, the town of Tonopah was formed by a man named Jim Butler. He filed claims on some plots of land that had originally been a Native American campground. They call it a campground, but nobody would be surprised if there were also bones under the soil. Jim built a small mining camp, and so did the Belmont Mining Company. Prospectors from across the country descended on the newly formed town of Tonopah. They grew from 14 men to a bustling 20th century village. Then they got hit by the plague. Well, they thought it was the plague. In reality, it was an outbreak of pneumonia. Between January and April of 1905, 56 people were killed. That doesn't sound like much, but remember the town started with only 14 residents. People feared the worst and fled for their lives. Many of the people who died from the pneumonia outbreak were buried at the Tonopah Cemetery. It may have closed in 1911, but the dead are still buried there. Look out the window of your room at Clown Motel and you'll see the graves for yourself. This cemetery is right next door. Can it get any worse than this? A haunted clown motel, possibly built on a Native American burial ground right beside a cemetery from the 1900s. Plus, the people who opened Clown Motel in the 1960s were the children of a man named Clarence Belmont. Clarence died in a fire at the mines before they closed in 1942. You are the master of your own fate, so you can stay wherever you want. But you have been warned. For those who have spent a night in this terrifying motel, let us all know what it was like in the comments. The earliest war. 10 skeletons were recently excavated at the site of a grisly massacre in Nataruk, Kenya. The skeletons show signs of extremely violent deaths. Researchers aren't 100% sure, but think they might have stumbled upon a graveyard from one of the first wars ever fought. These skeletons belong to people who went through the ringer. Their skulls clearly show that they were beaten over the head with something blunt and strong. Perhaps it was a wooden club. Other marks on their bones show that these people had been shot at with arrows, which got embedded in their bodies. The site is about 10,000 years old. According to Marta Mirazon-Lar from the University of Cambridge, it's the only prehistoric massacre of hunter-gatherers ever discovered. Martha believes the violence came as the result of small-scale warfare. But why? What happened that brought war into the world 10,000 years ago? One possibility is that these ancient people were in desperate straits and needed resources. Maybe they got into a fight over fish at a nearby lake. Maybe it was a time of drought, and the only option they saw was to kill off the competition. What do you think happened? The crocodiles of the Sahara. Ancient ruins are not the only things that scientists find in the Egyptian desert. There are also fossilized skeletons of ferocious beasts. Scientists recently came across the remains of a creature worthy of your nightmares. They found a monster that grew to be about the size of a bus. It was 30 feet long and weighed 3 tons. Its skull, at 5 feet long, was just as long as some people. It's called Macunosaurus rex, no relation to everyone's favorite carnivore, the Tyrannosaurus rex. The creature is a type of extinct crocodile. It was found in a chunk of rock from 120 million years ago, preserved in the dry heat of Tunisia's Sahara Desert. Scientists think it was the biggest crocodile to ever swim the seas. I don't know how else to describe the terrifying size of the prehistoric crocodile other than big. It was just plain big. The average modern crocodile rarely grows more than 14 feet in the wild. That's sizable, but still only half as large as Machinosaurus rex. You might be curious why the skeleton of a sea-dwelling crocodile was found buried in the desert. The Sahara didn't used to be a desert. Millions of years ago, it was mostly underwater. In Tunisia, where the super croc was found, the whole place had likely been a seaside lagoon. The bus-sized reptile would have lurked in the lagoon as an ambush predator. Dr. Stephen Brussate, paleontologist at the University of Edinburgh, said it most likely hunted turtles and fish. Even though it was huge, it still behaved like any other crocodile. Mr. Crocodile Rex relaxed in shallow water by the shore, waiting for something big to get near enough to gobble it up. There were other giant crocodiles in prehistoric Africa. In Niger, right at the edge of the Sahara, Paul Serino and his team of paleontologists found the fossil of a Sarcosuchus from 110 million years ago. The Sarcosuchus was so impossibly giant that they nicknamed it the Super Croc. It was 10 feet longer than Machinosaurus, covered in thick armor with sharp teeth and a strong jaw. I'm telling you, the Sahara was not the place to be prior to the extinction of the dinosaurs. You had an almost 100% chance of getting eaten by a giant, scaly beast. Thanks for watching! Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to see more right now, stick around for an older video you might have missed.
Kharakhoto. Nicknamed the Black City, Kharakhoto is an ancient walled city in the Gobi Desert of Inner Mongolia. This incredible historic site was once ruled by the infamous Genghis Khan. Dating back to 1032, it was built along the Silk Road and was a flourishing trade center and cultural hub under the Western Xia Empire. During the 13th century, Mongol ruler Genghis Khan began a series of military campaigns to take Western Xia territory. He took Kharakhoto in 1226. The city adopted the name Etzina and continued to thrive under Genghis Khan's rule. In 1372, soldiers for China's Ming dynasty approached the city and surrounded the Mongol king Karabator. They diverted the Black River, Karakhoto's only water source, cutting its plants and population off from much-needed hydration. Then they waited. Weakened by deadly thirst, Karabator's soldiers didn't stand a chance against the invading Ming warriors, who ruthlessly slaughtered everyone within the city's walls. Kharakhoto was ultimately abandoned and fell into ruins. Protected from looters because of its remote location, the site was rediscovered in the early 20th century. Thousands of texts in the ancient Tangut language and paintings were found. The 5 pagodas and nearly 33-foot-high walls that surrounded the city are still standing, along with several other crumbling buildings. Train Cemetery. On the outskirts of an abandoned transportation hub near the mesmerizing salt flats of Uyuni in Bolivia, there is a collection of rusting locomotives and rotting train cars. Known as the Cementerio de Trenes, or the Great Train Graveyard, the site is the product of a 19th century plan to expand the Uyuni region's train network. The project never came to fruition, as you can see. As the local mining industry began to dry up, developers ran into negotiation conflicts with other countries and experienced increasingly complicated technical problems. The plans ground to a screeching halt, leaving more than 100 trains parked in the middle of the desert. Most of the vehicles were imported from Britain during the early 20th century. They are heavily rusted from the region's salty winds, and they've also been vandalized. The property is open to visitors, many of whom stop by during a trip to the salt flats. A seemingly random train graveyard in the remote, scorching hot climate is strange enough. To make things even weirder, there are several hotels in the region that are made almost entirely out of salt, making a visit to Uyuni anything but ordinary. An immortal plant. The Namib Desert in southern Africa is one of the world's oldest and driest deserts. It's also home to one of the world's longest living plants, known as Welwitschia. This strange species has just 2 leaves, which can grow for thousands of years. The oldest Welwitschia plants are thought to date back at least 3,000 years to the beginning of the Iron Age, according to the New York Times. A recent study examined the species' genome in an attempt to figure out how and why it lived so long. Researchers found that around 86 million years ago, Welwitschia's genome doubled due to a mistake during the cell division process. At the time, the region was experiencing an especially dry period. Extreme conditions like this are often associated with genome duplication, according to lead study author Tao Wan. Co-author Andrew Leach says this resulted in a lot of junk DNA called retrotransposons. Even worse, the expanded genome demanded a lot of extra energy from the plant just to stay alive. Between 1 and 2 million years ago, Welwitschia responded to increasingly harsh conditions by silencing its retrotransposons through a process called methylation. This decreased the amount of energy the plant needed to survive, even with its huge genome. As plant biologist Jim Liebensmack pointed out to the New York Times, the bizarre plant's genetic resilience could possibly provide useful information for improving agriculture, particularly as global temperatures increase. Immortal plant life in the harshest environments? The capabilities of DNA are pretty fascinating. A lost Libyan civilization. In 2011, scientists revealed the discovery of over 100 ancient fortresses in the Sahara Desert in southwestern Libya. Dating back between 1 and 500 AD, these settlements were inhabited by a mysterious but advanced civilization called the Garamantes. Researchers identified the sites by examining satellite photographs and aerial images dating back to the 1950s and 60s. In 2011, a team of experts traveled to the fortresses, which are located 620 miles south of the Libyan capital of Tripoli. There, they found pottery samples, confirming that the Garamantes once occupied the site. The archaeologists noticed that their buildings were remarkably preserved, but they didn't get a chance to explore as in-depth as they wanted to. Unfortunately, the Libyan civil war cut the expedition short. At first glance, the ruins have a Romanesque feel, but they are not Roman at all, as the architecture belonged to a powerful African kingdom. The ruins were extremely tightly packed, with as many as 10 village-sized settlements being crammed into a 1.5 square mile area, almost like a modern city. Scientific knowledge of the Garamantes is limited. Violence and civil unrest in Libya has prevented thorough research from taking place, and the country has a limited budget for investing in archaeology. Going on what little they have to learn from, experts have determined that the Garamantes had their own writing system. They also made high-quality textiles and were metalworkers. Their most impressive achievement, however, was their advanced irrigation system, which enabled the society to grow plants, even in the middle of the desert. Aral Desert Ship Graveyard. Before the 1960s, the Aral Sea was the world's fourth largest inland sea. Once home to a thriving fishing industry, it straddled the border between modern-day Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. That all changed when the Soviet Union diverted the two main rivers feeding the sea to supply farms with water. The once vast body of water began to rapidly dry up, leaving behind a salty, poisonous wasteland in its wake. As the sea shrunk, its salt content reached toxic levels and killed off its marine life. With no more money to be made from fishing, people began to hightail it out of town for better prospects elsewhere. Most of what was once the Aral Sea is now the Aral Desert, and it's littered with dozens of rusting fishing boats that former residents abandoned. The decaying ships represent the distant memory of a place that once had a thriving economy, before it was replaced by the desolate and eerie scenery that gives a feeling of some kind of post-apocalyptic movie set. Most of the ghost ships sit at the edge of former harbor cities and seaside towns, near clusters of derelict buildings. The few people who still live in the area are plagued by health problems from the toxic dust that blows around. But in a surprising turn of events, the Aral Sea is once again being fed by the rivers that were diverted away from it. Its salt content has decreased, and fish have returned. For now, it's uncertain whether the sea will be restored to its former glory and perhaps replace the depressing sight of rotting ships. Film City. If you drive several hours from Qatar's capital city of Doha into the Qatari desert, you might stumble upon a deserted, ancient-looking Bedouin-style village filled with minarets, a mosque, and mud brick houses with wooden doors. The exact explanation behind its presence is somewhat of a mystery, depending on who you ask. Known as Film City, this site is thought to be an abandoned film set that was built for a TV series or a movie. It was once a fishing village, but was apparently abandoned during the 1970s. In 2009, the village was partially rebuilt, presumably for filming purposes, although the stories vary and nobody seems to know what to believe. The deserted nature of Film City is eerie enough on its own, but it gets even creepier when you think about the vast, seemingly limitless desert that surrounds it. Visitors are unlikely to see a car drive by or cross paths with another human, except for the security guard who oversees the property. And getting there requires a four-wheel drive vehicle. Big shout out to Britannia Renee and Ashley O. Thanks so much for supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos about amazing and mysterious discoveries. Old Skagen Church. Sometime between 1355 and 1387, a Gothic-style church dedicated to St. Lawrence of Rome was built just outside of Skagen, Denmark. Known as the Old Skagen Church, it belonged to the Danish crown until 1459, and it is one of the area's oldest buildings. Over the centuries, the region underwent a process called desertification, which is kind of what it sounds like. Sand swept in from the nearby Rabjerg Mile Dune and began accumulating around the brick church. By the late 18th century, the building's entrance became buried regularly. Whenever they wanted to attend a service, worshippers had to dig their way in through the sand. Eventually, the problem became too much to deal with. The church's contents were removed to protect them from damage, and in 1795, Denmark's king allowed the church to close. Most of the structure is either destroyed or buried. All that can be seen today is the main tower, which sticks up out of the sand. The National Museum of Denmark owns the site and maintains the tower as a navigational landmark. Very limited excavations have been carried out on the rest of the building. Local authorities believe that the floor and altar are still there, swallowed by sand, but they haven't investigated to confirm their suspicions. Huge prehistoric cemetery. While hunting for dinosaur remains at a site called Gobero in Niger in 2000, a group of scientists stumbled upon a large human graveyard dating as far back as 10,000 years. It's the biggest known cemetery ever found in the Sahara. In addition to around 200 human graves, the remains of fish, crocodiles, and other animals were buried there. Evidence indicates that the site was occupied during two different periods separated by a 1,000-year gap. The groups that lived there, the Kiphians and Tenarians, left behind an array of grave goods in addition to the remains buried at the cemetery. Researchers have learned a lot about what day-to-day life was like for people from these groups based on the artifacts, which include bone jewelry, arrowheads, and harpoons. There were numerous bizarre burials, including a man whose head was placed in a pot, and another who was laid to rest on top of a turtle shell, as well as a woman who was buried facing two children. The women and two children were likely buried on top of a bed of flowers, as evidenced by pollen found in their graves. Even more strangely, the tools and animals at Gobero seemed out of place for the modern Sahara climate. This is because they originate from a time known as the period of the Green Sahara, also known as an African humid period, during which changes in the Earth's orbit brought more rain to the region, resulting in an uptick in vegetation, water, and the life forms that come with it. Pretty amazing what can be learned from burial sites, even details about dramatic shifts in climate over time. An abandoned prison. In 1952, the U.S. government built the Boron Air Force Station in the Mojave Desert. Located in Kern County, California, the site remained in operation until 1975, when it was decommissioned. 4 years later, the abandoned collection of buildings was turned into a federal prison. Boron Federal Prison could accommodate up to 540 prisoners and had 25 units for staff members. There were several industrial buildings at the site where inmates assembled military vehicles and repaired forklifts for the U.S. Army. Like many low-security prisons, Boron had barrack-style housing instead of actual cells. But the facility was unique because it had almost no security, even compared to other minimum security prisons. It wasn't surrounded by a fence, there were no guard towers, and the doors didn't lock. But why? The property was so remote, the prisoners generally weren't dangerous to the general public, although there were a few instances where inmates escaped. Boron closed in 2000 amid budget cuts, and the building that housed the inmates was demolished in 2018. Several decrepit buildings are left standing at the site, which is still owned by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. They're in a noticeable state of disrepair and are not exactly safe to explore, so trespassing is strictly prohibited. Lake Dolores Water Park. During the 1950s, a California businessman named Bob Myers built a private water park for his extended family off Interstate 15 in Newberry Springs. It first opened its doors in 1962 and eventually evolved into a 250-acre recreational facility that was made open to the public. The property went by several different names over the years, including Discovery Water Park, Rockahupla Water Park, and Lake Dolores Water Park. These names reflect buyers and other owners' numerous attempts to rebrand and reopen the site, and bad luck seemed to plague the business. Each time someone tried to clean up the water park's image in hopes of drawing a resurgence of visitors, it seems like something got in the way. Byers held onto the business until 1990, when he sold it to an investment group who upgraded the equipment and reimagined the park with a 1950s theme. But their luck wasn't any better than his. After operating for just 3 seasons and accumulating copious amounts of debt, the park closed yet again. One more buyer tried and failed to turn the site into a success, and the property has been closed since 2004. The weathered, graffiti-covered equipment and buildings left behind are not only an eyesore, they are also said to be dangerous. There are rumors that the park will reopen yet again, but this hasn't happened. As of September, the property was listed on the market for $11 million. If you happen to be in the market for an abandoned, bad luck plagued desert water park. Thanks for watching! Do you like to visit the desert? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. See you soon! Bye!